The year is 1864, and a biting wind whips through the narrow, cobbled streets of Cava de Tirreni, a small, picturesque town nestled in the foothills of southern Italy. Rain, a persistent drizzle, slicked the ancient stones, reflecting the faint gaslight glow from the scattered lampposts. Dr. Alessandro Ricci, his tweed coat clinging to his slender frame, hurried through the twilight, his mind consumed by the baffling case that had landed on his desk just hours before. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and simmering fear, a fear that had begun to creep into the town like the fog from the surrounding mountains. Alessandro, a man of science and logic, prided himself on his unwavering dedication to truth, even when it challenged the prevailing superstitions of the era. He was a relatively young physician, yet his reputation for meticulous observation and a sharp intellect had quickly spread beyond the confines of Cava de Tirreni. This new case, however, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It began with whispers, as these things often do. Whispers of a child, barely 5 years old, whose skin had begun to harden, to calcify, turning a pale, mottled grey. The local priest, Father Tommaso, a man known more for his fervent sermons than for his medical insights, had quickly declared it a divine curse, a punishment for unspoken sins. But Alessandro knew better. He knew that the human body, in its infinite complexity, could harbor diseases stranger than any curse. Yet a part of him, a tiny, unsettling part, acknowledged the chilling uniqueness of the situation. His destination was the humble home of the Rossi family, a small, two-room dwelling on the outskirts of town, where the afflicted child, little Isabella, lay. As he approached, he could hear the muffled sobs of her mother, Maria, and the hushed, almost fearful tones of her father, Giuseppe. The air around the house felt heavy, laden with grief and a palpable sense of dread. He knocked, and the door creaked open, revealing Giuseppe's drawn, tear-streaked face. His eyes, usually bright and full of life, were now shadowed with a profound despair. "Dr. Ricci," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, "thank you for coming. We don't know what to do." Alessandro offered a sympathetic nod, stepping inside. The small room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was cold, despite the small fire flickering in the hearth, and carried the faint, unsettling odor of old liniments and something else, something metallic and earthy that Alessandro couldn't quite place. Isabella lay on a simple cot, her tiny form almost swallowed by the rough woolen blankets. Her mother sat beside her, gently stroking her forehead, her eyes fixed on her daughter with a mixture of terror and overwhelming love. As Alessandro approached, the lamp's light fell upon Isabella's face, and he felt a jolt of alarm. Her skin, usually soft and rosy, was indeed developing a strange stony texture. Patches on her cheeks and hands were noticeably harder, paler, almost like marble, and disturbingly cold to the touch. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, stared blankly at the ceiling, her breathing shallow and labored. There was no fever, no rash, no visible external injury, just the insidious, creeping calcification. "How long has this been happening?" Alessandro asked, his voice calm and professional, belying the unease swirling within him. He gently took Isabella's wrist, feeling the unnerving hardness beneath his fingertips. Maria choked back a sob. "Just over a week, doctor. At first we thought it was a rash, but then it started to harden, and she just stopped moving as much, stopped playing." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "She's turning to stone, doctor, just like the legends." Giuseppe, standing rigidly in the corner, cleared his throat. "We tried everything, doctor. Herbs, prayers. Nothing works. The others, they say it's a curse." His eyes met Alessandro's, pleading for reassurance, for an answer that didn't involve ancient superstitions. Alessandro knew that the legends Maria referred to were old local tales of people turning to stone as punishment for grave sins. It was a common folk belief, but one he had always dismissed as mere folklore. Now, looking at Isabella, he felt a cold shiver trace down his spine. The physical manifestation was horrifyingly real. He performed a thorough, yet gentle examination, his brow furrowed in concentration. He listened to her heart and lungs, checked her reflexes, and meticulously observed every inch of her skin. The calcification was progressing rapidly, already affecting her limbs and torso. He had read medical texts from across Europe, but no disease, no known affliction matched these symptoms. It was as if some unseen sculptor was slowly, meticulously turning the child into a statue. "Have there been any other cases like this in the region?" Alessandro asked, turning to Giuseppe, his voice low and urgent. "Any other children with similar symptoms?" Giuseppe hesitated, glancing at his wife. "Not that we know of, Doctor. Not exactly like this, but there have been rumors. Strange ailments in the next valley, children wasting away." His voice trailed off, fear palpable in the small room. Alessandro felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Rumors. In a time when news traveled slowly and often distorted, rumors were often the first hint of a larger, more sinister truth. Could this be more than an isolated tragedy? Could it be something spreading, something insidious and unseen, a medical anomaly that defied all rational explanation? The thought sent a chill far deeper than the evening air. He knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that he was on the precipice of something profound, something that would challenge the very foundations of his scientific understanding. The mystery was just beginning. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. This is a fictional story. The dawn over Cava de Tirreni brought no solace, only a gray, muted light that seemed to amplify the creeping dread. Dr. Ricci had spent a restless night, the image of Isabella's hardening skin etched into his mind. He had consulted his medical texts, meticulously poring over descriptions of rare dermatological conditions, bone diseases, anything that might even remotely explain the horrifying calcification. Nothing. The closest he could find were historical accounts of localized mineral deposits, but never on such a rapid, systemic scale, and certainly not leading to such a petrified state. As he walked through the town square that morning, the usual vibrant chatter of the marketplace was subdued. People moved with an uncharacteristic quietude, their gazes furtive, eyes darting nervously. He overheard snippets of hushed conversations. The stone's sickness, God's wrath. Another one. The rumors Giuseppe had mentioned were clearly more than mere whispers. They were solidifying into a collective fear. His first stop was the town's small library, a dusty room filled with ancient tomes and a formidable librarian, Signora Elena, who knew every book and every rumor. She was a woman of sharp intellect and an even sharper tongue, but her encyclopedic knowledge of local history was unmatched. "Signora Elena," Alessandro began, his voice calm despite his internal turmoil, "I need your assistance with something rather unusual." She looked up from her ledger, her spectacles perched on the end of her nose. "Unusual, Doctor. In this town, unusual is our daily bread. But I sense a deeper unease in your tone today." He explained Isabella's condition, omitting no detail of its bizarre progression. Elena listened, her initial skepticism slowly giving way to a flicker of concern in her shrewd eyes. When he finished, she tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. "The stone's sickness," she murmured, almost to herself. "It has been many decades, but I recall my grandmother speaking of something similar. Not precisely the same, mind you, but tales of children afflicted with a strange hardening, a petrifying ailment that baffled the old healers. "Do you recall any specifics?" Alessandro pressed, a surge of hope, however faint, rising within him. "Any names, locations, potential causes?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Alas, doctor, it was always discussed in whispers, associated with bad omens, ill-fated families. Never anything tangible, nothing scientific. Just a recurring shadow in our town's history." She paused, then added, "But there was a name, I believe, a family name, the Vitale family. They lived in the upper valley near the old quarries. They were said to have suffered terribly from a similar curse." The mention of quarries caught Alessandro's attention. Could there be a geological link? Minerals, perhaps? It was a tenuous thread, but a thread nonetheless. "Thank you, Signora Elena. This is a start." He left the library with a new direction, his mind racing. The Vitale family, the old quarries. It was a tangible lead, something to investigate beyond Isabella's bedside. He knew the quarries well. They were long abandoned, their stone exhausted, but the area was still remote and desolate. Before heading to the quarries, Alessandro decided to visit Father Tommaso. While he dismissed the priest's supernatural explanations, he knew Tommaso was deeply embedded in the community and might have heard things the more superstitious villagers would only whisper to him. He found Father Tommaso in the small, austere church, knelt in prayer. The air was cold and damp, smelling of old incense and stale candle wax. When Tommaso rose, his face was etched with a familiar grimness. "Dr. Ricci," the priest said, his voice grave, "I trust you have seen the latest unfortunate soul?" "I have, Father, and I am seeking answers beyond divine intervention. Have you heard of other children afflicted with this condition? Perhaps in other villages?" Tommaso sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "The whispers are everywhere, Doctor. In Salerno, in Amalfi, even up in the mountains. They speak of children much like Isabella, turning stiff, unyielding, but these are just rumors, stories that spread faster than the plague when fear takes hold." "And the Vitale family, from the upper valley?" Alessandro pressed. "Do you know anything about their history?" Tommaso's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah, the Vitale, a tragic lineage. They were indeed said to be cursed, plagued by strange ailments for generations. There were stories long ago of children born with skin like stone, though I always dismissed them as folk tales, meant to teach humility." He paused, a strange glint in his eye. "They lived very close to the old forgotten spring, the one locals called aqua muta, silent water. It was believed to have healing properties, but also, according to some, to bring misfortune if disrespected." Alessandro's mind latched onto aqua muta, a spring, water. Could it be something in the water supply? A geological contaminant, perhaps? The quarries, the spring, a picture, however fragmented, was starting to form. The possibility of a widespread environmental cause was far more terrifying than a single isolated case, but it was also a path towards a scientific explanation. He thanked Father Tommaso and left the church, his thoughts a whirlwind. The sun had begun to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the cobblestones. The town, once so familiar, now felt imbued with an unsettling, almost oppressive quiet. The fear was no longer just a whisper. It was a palpable presence, a shadow lengthening over Cava de Tirreni. Alessandro knew he had to act quickly. The children, like Isabella, were running out of time. The weight of the unknown pressed down on him, urging him forward into the growing darkness. The path to the old quarries and the fabled aqua muta was steep and treacherous, winding through dense olive groves and ancient gnarled chestnut trees. The air grew colder as Dr. Ricci ascended, carrying the damp scent of moss and decaying leaves. The sky was overcast, a sullen grey that mirrored the growing unease in his heart. It was the kind of landscape that felt both beautiful and foreboding, a place where secrets could easily be swallowed by the earth. He had borrowed a sturdy mule from a sympathetic farmer, its hooves clattering softly on the rocky trail. Accompanying him was Tommaso, a young, earnest medical apprentice Alessandro had taken under his wing. Tommaso, though prone to nervous fidgeting, possessed a keen intelligence and an unwavering loyalty. He was also a native of Cava de Tirreni, intimately familiar with its hidden nooks and old stories. "Are you certain this is wise, Doctor?" Tommaso asked, his voice laced with apprehension as they navigated a particularly narrow ridge. "The locals speak of this place with great fear. They say aqua muta is cursed, that it brings only sorrow." "Superstition, Tommaso," Alessandro replied, though the desolate silence of the valley did little to soothe his own nerves. "We seek answers, not folklore. If there is a connection to the Vitale family and their historical ailments, it might lie within the geological makeup of this area, perhaps in the water itself." They eventually reached the abandoned quarries, vast, jagged scars on the hillside, their enormous pits filled with stagnant, dark water. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp stone and a peculiar, almost metallic tang. The scale of the place was imposing, a monument to human endeavor now reclaimed by nature. Following Elena's vague directions and Tommaso's local knowledge, they navigated the treacherous terrain around the quarries, eventually discovering a hidden, overgrown path. It led deeper into a ravine where the light struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of trees. The sound of their footsteps was swallowed by the profound silence, broken only by the drip of unseen water. Finally, they came upon it, aqua muta. It wasn't a gushing spring, but a small, unassuming pool, barely a meter in diameter, fed by a trickle of water emerging from a fissure in the rock face. The water itself was unnervingly clear, almost translucent, reflecting the grey sky like a polished mirror. No fish swam in its depths. No insects danced on its surface. It was indeed silent water, utterly devoid of life. Alessandro knelt, carefully observing the surrounding rock. The stones around the spring had an odd, slightly chalky residue, and the ground was unusually dry despite the recent rain. He dipped a gloved finger into the water, finding it surprisingly cold. He then retrieved a small, empty vial from his medical bag and carefully collected a sample. "Doctor, look!" Tommaso exclaimed, pointing to a series of faint, almost indecipherable carvings on the rock face above the spring. They were crude, ancient symbols, clearly man-made but eroded by time and weather. Alessandro leaned closer, his brow furrowed. They looked like rudimentary human figures, some with distorted limbs, others almost indistinguishable. One figure, in particular, seemed to depict a child, its outstretched arms unnaturally stiff, its body almost rectangular. A chill ran down his spine. It was a disturbing coincidence. Could these be the very stone children of legend? He took a few steps back, surveying the scene. The silence of the place was oppressive, almost suffocating. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer on the surface of the water, a subtle iridescence that suggested something more than pure H2O. "This is not ordinary water, Tommaso," Alessandro murmured, holding up the vial to the faint light. "It has an unusual density, and look at the faint sheen on the surface. We need to analyze this, and the soil around it." As Alessandro collected a soil sample, he noticed something else. Small, almost microscopic fragments of what appeared to be dried, calcified moss clinging to the rocks around the spring. He scraped some of it into a separate sample bag. Suddenly, a sharp, cracking sound echoed from deeper within the ravine. Both men stiffened, their heads snapping towards the sound. It was distinct, like stone cracking under immense pressure. "What was that?" Tommaso whispered, his face paling. Alessandro gripped the small knife he carried for samples, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice barely audible. He felt a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest, a primal warning. Another crack, closer this time, followed by a faint, grating noise. It sounded like something heavy being dragged over rough stone. The unsettling stillness of the ravine was shattered, replaced by a growing sense of unease. They were alone, in this desolate place, and whatever was making that sound was unseen. Alessandro's scientific mind wrestled with the fear. Was it just the wind? Perhaps a rockfall? Or was there something else here? Something more sinister than the geological secrets he had come to uncover? The silence of Aquamuta had hidden its mysteries well, but now, it seemed, those mysteries were beginning to stir. The raw, unnerving sound amplified the isolation, solidifying the realization that they were vulnerable, far from the comforting logic of the town. The path back suddenly seemed impossibly long. The cracking and grating sounds continued, faint but undeniably present, echoing from the deeper recesses of the ravine. "Doctor," Ricci's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unsettling silence. Tommaso clutched his arm, his breath hitched in his throat. "Perhaps it's just the rock settling, Doctor," Tommaso stammered, though his wide, terrified eyes betrayed his words. "Perhaps," Alessandro replied, but his instincts screamed otherwise. The sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic. Driven by a grim curiosity and a professional obligation to investigate every lead, no matter how unsettling, Alessandro slowly advanced, pulling Tommaso along with him. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. They moved stealthily, deeper into the shadowed gully, the air growing heavier, colder. The light was almost completely obscured by the thick canopy overhead, forcing them to rely on the faint glow from the sky filtering through the branches. The metallic scent that Alessandro had noticed faintly in Isabella's home was stronger here, mingling with the earthy smell of the ravine. The sounds grew louder, clearer now. It was indeed a scraping, dragging noise, accompanied by intermittent, dull thuds. And then, a new sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whimpering. A child's whimpering. Alessandro's blood ran cold. He quickened his pace, pushing through a curtain of thorny bushes, ignoring the scratches on his face and hands. Tommaso followed close behind, panting. What they found next froze them both in their tracks. In a small, natural alcove formed by an overhang of rock lay a scene of unspeakable horror. A second child, a boy no older than 6, lay on the damp ground. His eyes were open, wide and staring, but utterly lifeless. His small body, like Isabella's, was not merely hardening. It was completely rigid, a chilling statue of flesh and bone. His skin was a uniform, pale gray, textured like rough stone, and an almost imperceptible powdery dust covered his form. Kneeling beside him, a figure was meticulously, almost reverently, scraping away at the boy's skin with a small, flat implement. It was a man, hunched over, his back to them, his clothes dark and nondescript, blending into the shadows. He was not disturbing the boy, not harming him further, but rather engaged in some macabre ritual, collecting the dust that flaked from the petrified skin. A faint sound escaped Tommaso's lips, a gasp of pure terror. The man stiffened, then slowly, deliberately, turned his head. Alessandro felt a jolt of recognition even in the dim light. The man was thin, almost skeletal, with hollowed eyes that seemed to glow with an unnerving intensity. His face was gaunt, his skin strangely pale, almost ashen. He was older than Alessandro had initially assumed, perhaps in his late 40s or early 50s, but his movements were precise, agile. He held a small, tarnished silver locket in his hand, clutching it almost like a talisman. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence of the ravine broken only by their ragged breathing. The man's eyes held no malice, no immediate threat, only a disturbing, profound emptiness. But what he was doing, the chilling tableau before them, spoke of a deep, unsettling madness. Who are you? Alessandro managed to stammer, his voice hoarse, his medical bag forgotten in his trembling hand. The man smiled then, a slow, unsettling curve of his lips that did not reach his dead eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was a whisper, dry and rustling like dead leaves. They call me the sculptor of silence. His gaze flickered from Alessandro to Tommaso, then back to the boy, a possessive gleam in his eyes. Another one joins the collection, he murmured, his voice devoid of emotion as if speaking of an inanimate object. Perfection takes time, doctor, but the results are eternal. Alessandro's mind reeled. This was not a simple grieving parent. This was something far more sinister, a deranged individual connected to the stone's sickness, perhaps even its cause. The idea was horrific, yet it offered a terrifying path to understanding. "What have you done to this child?" Alessandro demanded, forcing strength into his voice, pushing past the overwhelming fear. "What is this stone sickness?" The sculptor of silence merely tilted his head, a strange, almost childlike curiosity in his gaze. "The children are merely transitioning, becoming truly permanent. Beautiful, are they not? Untouched by decay, by the ravages of time. My masterpieces." He gestured vaguely at the petrified boy, a twisted pride in his voice. As he spoke, Alessandro noticed something else. Around the man's neck, partially concealed by his dark clothing, hung a crudely carved wooden amulet. It was shaped like a small, stylized hand, its fingers rigid and pointed. The symbol, combined with the man's chilling words and the unsettling scene, sent a fresh wave of dread through Alessandro. "You are responsible for this?" Tommaso cried out, his voice shrill with horror and disbelief. The sculptor's eyes hardened, a flash of something akin to annoyance crossing his otherwise blank face. "They are gifts," he whispered, a hint of steel in his tone. "Gifts from the earth. The silent water flows, and the gifts are revealed." He looked back at the spring, a strange reverence in his gaze. A long time ago, a family here, the Vitale, understood. They tried to protect the gifts, but they were weak. They succumbed. The Vitale family. This man was directly linked to the old legends, to the cursed lineage. He was not merely a lunatic. He was a lunatic with a frightening connection to the very source of this horrifying affliction. Suddenly, the sculptor moved, not towards them but away, a swift, almost unnatural movement, disappearing deeper into the shadows of the ravine. He didn't run, but seemed to flow, melting into the dense undergrowth. Alessandro and Tommaso stood frozen, momentarily paralyzed by shock and fear. Alessandro snapped out of it first. "Tommaso, we must alert the carabinieri. This man, he is a monster." He knelt beside the petrified child, a wave of profound sorrow washing over him. The boy's face, though locked in a stony stillness, carried a faint, almost imperceptible expression of peace, as if he had simply fallen asleep. The dust the sculptor had been collecting worried Alessandro. Was it some kind of chemical? Or something far more insidious? The grim discovery had provided a horrifying answer, but it had also opened a new, terrifying chapter in the mystery. The stone sickness was not a natural disease, but a deliberate, macabre act. And the sculptor of silence, a chilling phantom of the ravine, was still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next masterpiece. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. This is a fictional story. Back in Cava de Tirreni, the news of the discovery in the ravine spread like wildfire, fueled by Tommaso's frantic account and Alessandro's grim confirmation. The town, already on edge, plunged into a state of panic. The carabinieri, led by the stoic but slow-moving Sergeant Rossi, were dispatched to the ravine. But by the time they arrived, the sculptor of silence had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the petrified remains of the child and the chilling imprint of his madness. Alessandro, however, was not content to merely chase shadows. He immediately began analyzing the samples he had collected from aqua muta and the petrified moss. He worked tirelessly in his small, makeshift laboratory, a room usually reserved for preparing tinctures and examining blood samples. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, and the flickering gaslight cast long, dancing shadows as he bent over his microscope. His preliminary findings were startling. The water from aqua muta contained unusually high concentrations of a calcium carbonate compound, far exceeding normal levels for potable water. More significantly, he found traces of a rare mineral, likely a silicate, within the water, and even more prominently in the calcified moss he had collected. This mineral, when combined with the high calcium content, could potentially create a highly concentrated solution that, upon evaporation or absorption, could lead to rapid, localized calcification. The dust the sculptor had been collecting from the child's skin, when analyzed under the microscope, revealed not just calcified skin cells, but also fine particles of the same silicate mineral. This suggested a direct link between the water, the mineral, and the horrifying petrification. As for the sculptor himself, Alessandro presented his findings to Sergeant Rossi, emphasizing the scientific evidence. "Sergeant," he explained, holding up the vial of water, "this is not a curse. It is a chemical process, manipulated by a disturbed individual. The stone sickness is a form of accelerated calcification, likely induced by exposure to concentrated forms of these minerals, possibly through the water or through direct application." Sergeant Rossi, a man of practical mind, scratched his chin, skepticism still etched on his face. "So you are saying this sculptor is poisoning children with rock dust?" "Not precisely poisoning in the traditional sense," Alessandro clarified, frustrated by the difficulty in conveying such an unprecedented concept. "He is, in essence, accelerating a natural process of mineralization within the body, perhaps through some insidious method of exposure. He clearly possesses some knowledge, however twisted, of these geological properties. His delusion is not just madness. It is a madness rooted in a perverted understanding of natural chemistry." He also presented the crude wooden amulet he had sketched from memory. "I believe this amulet, and the silver locket he was holding, are significant. They might hold clues to his identity or his twisted beliefs." Sergeant Rossi, while still bewildered, agreed to circulate a description of the sculptor and the amulets to neighboring villages. "We'll send men to search the ravine more thoroughly, Doctor. But a man who can disappear like that, it's as if he's a phantom." Meanwhile, Alessandro returned to Isabella's side. Her condition had worsened. More of her skin had hardened, and her breathing was even shallower. He tried administering various chelating agents, hoping to reverse the calcification, but they proved ineffective. The process was too far advanced, too deeply ingrained. He felt a gnawing despair, a terrible sense of helplessness in the face of such a unique and terrifying affliction. He watched Maria, Isabella's mother, her face a mask of profound sorrow, gently caress her daughter's rigid hand. The raw grief in the room was almost unbearable. He knew he couldn't save Isabella, but he had to understand, to prevent this horror from befalling other children. His mind kept returning to the sculptor of silence. His chilling words, "Gifts from the earth. Perfection takes time." It wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a ritual, a twisted artistic endeavor. This man believed he was creating something beautiful, something eternal. This wasn't just a crime. It was a deeply disturbing psychological puzzle. Alessandro realized that to truly understand the sculptor, he had to delve into the man's fractured mind, to unravel the delusion that drove him. Where did he get this knowledge? What was the significance of the Vitale family of Acquamuta? And how did he choose his victims? He returned to Signora Elena at the library, hoping to find more obscure texts on local legends, ancient mining practices, or even historical accounts of peculiar ailments. Elena, though shaken by the news, was as keen as ever to assist. "Doctor," she said, her voice hushed, "I recall something else about the Vitale family. They were not merely afflicted, they were also rumored to be protectors of the Acquamuta, believing it held a sacred, though dangerous power. Some believed they experimented with its properties, trying to harness its gifts." Experimented. The word resonated with Alessandro. Could the sculptor be a descendant of the Vitale family, carrying on a twisted, inherited legacy of experimentation, now warped into a horrifying obsession? The thought was chilling. It provided a potential motive, a lineage of madness and macabre knowledge passed down through generations. The mystery was no longer just about a strange disease. It was about the dark corners of the human mind, the perversion of knowledge, and the terrifying consequences of an unhinged obsession. The sculptor of silence was not just a threat to the town's children. He was a walking testament to the grim reality that the greatest horrors often spring from within humanity itself. Alessandro felt a growing urgency, a desperate need to stop this man before his masterpieces claimed more innocent lives. Days bled into a week, each passing hour intensifying the fear in Cava de Tirreni. Despite the Carabinieri's efforts, the sculptor of silence remained elusive, a phantom haunting the periphery of the town's collective dread. Isabella, tragically, succumbed to her condition, her small body turning entirely to stone, a heartbreaking testament to the horror that had befallen her. Alessandro felt the weight of her loss deeply, fueling his resolve to stop the sculptor. He spent his days in a feverish pursuit of knowledge, dividing his time between meticulous scientific analysis and delving into the forgotten corners of local history. The samples from Acquamuta confirmed his initial suspicions: an unusually high concentration of calcium carbonate, and crucially, a unique bioactive silicate mineral that, when combined with the high calcium and absorbed into living tissue, seemed to act as a catalyst for rapid calcification. He was convinced this mineral was the key to the stone sickness. His nights were consumed by studying dusty historical texts provided by Signora Elena. He discovered that the Vitale family were not just a cursed lineage. They were indeed known for their eccentric pursuits, particularly an obsession with local geology and mineralogy. They were rumored to have inherited an ancient alchemical manuscript, a compendium of observations on the Earth's hidden powers, passed down through generations. This manuscript, long thought lost or dismissed as fiction, supposedly detailed various properties of local minerals, including peculiar effects on organic matter. One evening, as rain lashed against his window, Alessandro found a breakthrough within a forgotten ledger in the Vitale family archives at the library, an old inventory list of their estate. Amongst descriptions of land and livestock, a single entry stood out: Il medaglione d'argento silente, the silent silver locket, unique, passed down with the knowledge. The silver locket, the very object the sculptor had been clutching in the ravine. It wasn't just a personal trinket, it was an heirloom, a symbol, perhaps even a key. Alessandro immediately sought out Sergeant Rossi. "Sergeant, the locket. It's called the Silent Silver Locket. It belonged to the Vitale family and it holds significance. We must find it." Rossi, though still struggling with the abstract nature of Alessandro's scientific explanations, understood the importance of a tangible clue. He promised to intensify the search for the sculptor, with a particular emphasis on finding the locket. Meanwhile, Alessandro's research into the Vitale family archives yielded more disturbing information. He uncovered accounts of the family's attempts to preserve beauty through unusual methods, references to a secret chamber of eternal slumber within their ancestral home, a sprawling, dilapidated villa rumored to exist somewhere deep in the hills near the old Vitale quarries. The accounts were vague, written in a florid, almost poetic language, but the implication was clear. The Vitale family, or at least some members, had a history of obsession with petrification, a twisted form of immortality. The thought sent a shiver down Alessandro's spine. Could the sculptor of silence be the last, deranged remnant of this family, carrying on their macabre legacy? And what was in this chamber of eternal slumber? More petrified children? He felt a deep internal conflict. His scientific mind demanded empirical evidence, yet the sheer strangeness of the situation pushed him towards embracing the historical whispers, the folklore. The sculptor's madness was clearly rooted in a family history of strange practices, of a perverse interpretation of scientific and alchemical knowledge. The next morning, a frantic knock on his door shattered the uneasy calm. It was Tommaso, his face pale with a mix of fear and excitement. "Doctor," another one, little Marco. They found him near the outskirts, near the old Vitale property. He's hardening, doctor, and they found this." Tommaso held out a small, crudely carved wooden amulet. It was identical to the one Alessandro had sketched, shaped like a rigid, stylized hand. But there was a small, almost imperceptible symbol etched into its surface. A stylized V, the mark of the Vitale family. "This is it," Alessandro whispered, a grim determination setting in. He's leaving them behind. A calling card, perhaps, or a warning. The fact that Marco was found near the old Vitale property was a crucial detail. It meant the sculptor was operating closer to his presumed base, becoming bolder. Or perhaps he was deliberately leaving a trail. Alessandro rushed to Marco's home. The boy was barely 6, his parents distraught. The calcification was beginning on his hands and face, a faint grayness spreading. Unlike Isabella, Marco was conscious, whimpering in confusion, his eyes wide with fear. The sight fueled Alessandro's anger and resolve. He had to act. He spoke to Marco's parents, gathering details. Marco had been playing near the edge of the woods when he encountered a strange man who offered him a shiny pebble. Marco, curious, had taken it, and the man had gently touched his hand. That touch. That was the method. Direct application, likely of a highly concentrated solution of the silicate mineral, perhaps disguised as a shiny pebble or a small, harmless gift. "He's not just using the water, Tommaso," Alessandro realized aloud, explaining his theory. "He's refining the mineral, concentrating it, applying it directly. The shiny pebble was likely a hardened piece of this compound." The new insight was terrifying. It meant the sculptor had a sophisticated understanding, however deranged, of the mineral's properties. He wasn't just a madman, he was a twisted chemist. Alessandro felt a surge of cold fury. This man was deliberately inflicting this horror, turning innocent children into his morbid art. The psychological torment for the families was immense, the children themselves reduced to terrifying living statues. He knew what he had to do. The carabinieri, while diligent, were not equipped to track such a unique and elusive individual. Alessandro, armed with his scientific understanding and the new historical clues, knew he had to find the Vitale Via, the chamber of eternal slumber, and confront the sculptor himself. The locket was key, and the stylized V on the amulet confirmed its link to the Vitale family. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, forming a picture far more disturbing than he could have imagined. He had to face this darkness head-on before another child became a masterpiece of the sculptor of silence. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. This is a fictional story. The Vitale Villa, a forgotten relic whispered about in old folk tales, was finally located by Alessandro and Tommaso, thanks to fragmented family archives, Signora Elena's local knowledge, and an old hunter's guidance. It stood deep in a secluded valley, a skeletal structure of crumbling stone, swallowed by overgrown cypress trees and brambles. A pervasive stillness hung in the air, a profound sense of abandonment. This place. It feels wrong, Doctor, Tommaso whispered, clutching his rosary. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the dilapidated facade, and the air carried the damp scent of decay and a familiar, subtly metallic tang. Alessandro, though apprehensive, felt his resolve harden. This was where the answers lay, and perhaps where the sculptor hid. Stay alert, Tommaso, and stay close. They pushed through the overgrown path. The villa's main door hung ajar, revealing a maw of darkness. Inside, the air was cold and musty, thick with dust, decay, and an unsettling chemical scent. Weak moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting a ghostly luminescence on the crumbling interior. The rooms were a wreck of forgotten grandeur, with rotting furniture and shredded tapestries. They moved cautiously, their footsteps amplified by the oppressive quiet. There were no signs of recent habitation, suggesting the sculptor used it for specific purposes, perhaps as a hidden laboratory or for his creations. As they ascended the rickety staircase, the dread intensified. On the second floor, they found a thick, solid oak door at the end of a dark corridor. Beside it, faintly visible, was a crudely carved, stylized V, the mark of the Vitale family, identical to the amulet found with Marco. "This must be it," Alessandro murmured. "The chamber of eternal slumber." The door was locked. As Alessandro examined the heavy mechanism, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound emanated from behind it, distinct in the overwhelming silence. He looked at Tommaso, a shared understanding passing between them. He was in there, the sculptor of silence. "We need to get this open, Tommaso," Alessandro said, his voice firm. "Find something we can use as a lever." Tommaso, despite his fear, nodded and quickly searched nearby rooms. Alessandro remained by the door, listening to the methodical scratching and occasional metallic click. He imagined the sculptor meticulously working on another child, a wave of cold fury hardening his resolve. Tommaso returned with an iron poker. Together, they wedged it into the doorframe. The old wood groaned and splintered, and with a final resounding crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward with a mournful creak, revealing a scene that made both men recoil. The room was meticulously clean, starkly contrasting the rest of the villa. The air was cool, dry, and heavy with the strong, earthy, metallic scent Alessandro now associated with calcification. Rows of shelves lined the walls, displaying perfectly preserved petrified animal specimens, birds, a squirrel, a fox, unnervingly lifelike, yet completely stone. In the center of the room, bathed in moonlight, stood a large, ornate marble pedestal. On it, positioned with chilling precision, was the most horrifying sight. A child, a girl no older than Isabella, upright, her body almost entirely transformed. Her skin was a smooth, pale gray, her features delicate but rigid, her eyes wide and blank. Even her clothes were stiffened, integrated into the stone. She was a perfect Macabre statue. The sculptor had completed another masterpiece. And kneeling before her, meticulously wiping away a faint powdery residue from her stony cheek, was the sculptor of silence. He looked up, his hollow eyes meeting Alessandro's. He held the silent silver locket, its surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "Doctor," he whispered, oddly calm. "You've arrived just in time for the grand unveiling. Isn't she magnificent? My finest work yet." Alessandro felt a surge of nausea and rage. The sheer audacity, the cold, detached madness of the man was sickening. But he also recognized the opportunity. He had found him. He had found the chamber, and he had found his latest victim. The confrontation was inevitable. The mystery, however grim, was finally upon its chilling resolution. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. This is a fictional story. The air in the chamber of eternal slumber pulsed with tension. The sculptor of silence rose slowly, his hollow eyes fixed on Alessandro. He still clutched the silent silver locket. "Magnificent, isn't she?" he repeated, gesturing to the stony girl with possessive pride. "The ultimate preservation. No decay, no disease, no ravages of time, only pure, unblemished permanence." "You monster!" Tommaso cried, fear and anger in his voice. "How could you do this to innocent children?" The sculptor's gaze flickered with irritation. "Innocence is fleeting. Beauty is fragile. I give them eternity, the ultimate form." He turned back to Alessandro. "You understand, Doctor? You see the science, the transformation." "I see a perversion of science," Alessandro retorted, his voice steady. "A horrifying affliction caused by your twisted understanding of natural processes. How do you do it? What is your method?" The sculptor smiled thinly. The Vitale family understood the earth's whispers. Aqua muta is infused with permanence. My ancestors discovered its unique properties. The secret was passed down through the ancient alchemical manuscript you sought. They tried to use its gifts for healing, but they were weak, too sentimental. They feared its true power, calling it a curse. They succumbed to its effects. I, however, am not afraid. He opened the silver locket. Inside, a small, dark, glistening crystal hummed faintly. "This," he whispered reverently, "is the concentrated essence, the heart of Aqua Muta's power. A unique, bioactive silicate crystal formed over millennia. When pulverized and infused with water, it accelerates calcification, turning flesh into stone. A perfect, natural mummification." Alessandro felt a cold wave. This wasn't just a mineral, it was a unique crystal, refined and concentrated by a brilliant, deranged chemist. "And how do you administer it?" Alessandro pressed. "A simple touch," the sculptor replied, his eyes gleaming. "A gift for the children, disguised as a shining pebble or a drop on their skin. A gentle caress, and the transformation begins, slowly, beautifully, like a sculptor refining his marble. I watch them. I nurture the process." "You watch them suffer," Tommaso interjected. "Suffer?" The sculptor scoffed. "They find peace, boy, the silence, the stillness. They become part of the earth, eternal, unchanging, like the mountains, my creations, my family. The world dismisses them, fears them, but I see their true form, their ultimate destiny." "And the amulets?" Alessandro asked, pointing to the wooden symbol. "A mark of kinship," the sculptor said, touching the hand-shaped amulet around his neck. "A tribute to my ancestors who understood the power of this earth. The V is for Vitale, for the heritage of understanding." His confession was chillingly coherent, rooted in a complex, twisted worldview. He was the last Vitale, carrying on a macabre legacy. "Why children?" Alessandro asked. The sculptor's expression softened, then hardened again. "Children are unblemished, Doctor. Their forms are perfect, unmarred by life's weariness. Their spirits are pure, making them ideal vessels for this ultimate transformation. They are the purest forms of art." Alessandro realized the sculptor saw himself as an artist, children as his medium. This was a systematic, ritualistic process driven by a deep-seated, inherited delusion. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed downstairs. The carabinieri had found the villa. Their shouts reverberated through the structure. The sculptor's eyes narrowed, his serene madness replaced by annoyance. "They always interfere," he murmured, his voice sharper. "They don't understand. They never understand." He moved swiftly, grabbing the ancient alchemical manuscript from a nearby table. He clutched it, his eyes darting towards a hidden door in the stone wall behind the petrified girl. "This is not over, Doctor," he hissed. "The Earth's whispers will continue. The gifts will always be revealed." He pulled a concealed lever. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Before Alessandro or Tommaso could react, the sculptor of silence slipped through, disappearing into the darkness. The faint metallic hum of the locket was the last thing to fade. Alessandro rushed to the opening, but the passage was too narrow. He heard the distant shouts of the carabinieri below. He had his answers, horrifying as they were. The locket, the crystal, the ancient manuscript, the Vitale legacy, all intertwined in a web of delusion and terror. But the sculptor, the source of this nightmare, had once again slipped through their grasp. The carabinieri flooded into the chamber of eternal slumber, their lanterns illuminating the petrified child and stony animals. Sergeant Rossi's face was a mask of shock and disgust. "My God, Doctor," he breathed. "He's truly a monster." Alessandro quickly explained the hidden passage and the sculptor's escape, detailing the unique bioactive silicate crystal and the alchemical manuscript he carried. "He is dangerous, Sergeant. He believes he is preserving life. He will strike again." Rossi immediately dispatched his men to secure the area and search the passage. The chase was on. Alessandro, fueled by anger and a desperate need to end the nightmare, joined the pursuit with Tommaso. The passage, a dark winding tunnel, led downwards into a vast natural cavern, dimly lit by phosphorescent mineral deposits. The air was cold, damp, and metallic. It was a labyrinth of stalagmites and stalactites, perfect for hiding. "Fan out," Rossi commanded. "Find him." The carabinieri spread out. Alessandro, with his keen observation, focused on subtle clues. Faint footprints, a disturbed cobweb, a metallic glint. He knew the sculptor was navigating his domain. He followed a faint trail of disturbed dust, leading him deeper into the cavern, away from the main group. Tommaso, though nervous, remained steadfast. "Doctor, do you think he's armed?" Tommaso whispered. "His weapon is his madness, Tommaso," Alessandro replied grimly, "and his twisted knowledge. But we must be careful." They emerged into a smaller chamber. There, illuminated by a small gas lamp, was the sculptor of silence. He was hunched over a crude stone table, frantically pulverizing a dark, glistening crystal. Beside him lay the alchemical manuscript, open to diagrams of mineral structures. The silent silver locket gleamed around his neck. He looked up, his eyes wide and wild. His composure was gone, replaced by desperate, cornered fury. "You won't stop me," he shrieked. "The work must continue. The gifts must be revealed." He scattered the pulverized crystal onto the table, then lunged towards them, hands outstretched as if to transfer the deadly dust. Alessandro quickly stepped back, pulling Tommaso. "Stay back, sculptor. It's over. We know what you're doing." The sculptor ignored him, his eyes fixed on Tommaso. "Another vessel. Pure. Unblemished." He lunged again. At that moment, Sergeant Rossi and 2 carabinieri burst in. "Freeze, don't move," Rossi shouted, drawing his pistol. The sculptor hesitated, startled. In that split second, Alessandro lunged at the stone table, sweeping his arm across it, sending the pulverized crystals scattering. The sculptor cried out in guttural rage, "My work! My masterpieces!" He screamed, eyes burning. He rushed towards Alessandro, desperate to salvage his art. As he bent, frantically clawing at the floor, a carabinieri officer brought his rifle butt down on the sculptor's head. The man crumpled, unconscious. The silent silver locket skittered away, and the alchemical manuscript fell open beside him, revealing the chilling testament of his family's dark legacy. Alessandro knelt beside the unconscious sculptor, checking his pulse. He was alive, barely. Rossi secured the man. Alessandro retrieved the locket and manuscript. The crystal inside the locket, the source of the stone sickness, pulsed faintly. The ancient text, not magic, but rudimentary chemistry and geology, was interpreted through pathological obsession. It was a scientific madness, inherited and refined into a terrifying instrument of destruction. The grim reckoning had arrived. The sculptor of silence was captured. The nightmare, for now, was over, but the image of the petrified children would forever haunt Alessandro, a stark reminder of the fragile line between scientific curiosity and perverted obsession. The mystery of the stone-skinned children had been unraveled, revealing a truth far more disturbing than any supernatural curse. In the aftermath of the sculptor of silence's capture, Cava de Tirreni slowly began to heal. The revelation of the man's twisted science, rather than a divine curse, brought a strange relief mixed with profound horror. Dr. Alessandro Ricci became a local hero, his scientific acumen credited with unraveling the Macabre mystery. The sculptor, Massimo Vitale, the last descendant of the ancient Vitale family, was taken into custody. His calm confession detailed his inherited delusion, his years of refining the silicate crystal from aqua muta, and his belief in creating eternal masterpieces. Deemed medically insane, he was committed to an asylum in Salerno, forever convinced of his petrified creations. The Vitale Villa was thoroughly searched. In the chamber of eternal slumber, investigators found a concealed niche containing 2 additional petrified children, smaller and older. Alessandro theorized these were the original stone children from Vitale family legends, victims of early exposures or misguided experiments. The villa was eventually sealed, a grim monument to a dark family legacy. Alessandro dedicated himself to studying the unique bioactive silicate crystal. Driven by the memory of Isabella and other victims, his tireless research led to groundbreaking papers detailing accelerated calcification and the specific mineral. His findings, initially met with skepticism, revolutionized the understanding of mineral toxicology. The silent silver locket, now safely stored without its dangerous crystal, became a chilling exhibit. The ancient alchemical manuscript, meticulously studied, revealed its true nature as a misguided, pseudo-scientific treatise. Tommaso, deeply affected, became Alessandro's trusted assistant. His initial fear transformed into fervent scientific inquiry. He learned invaluable lessons about reason versus fear and the dark potential of human obsession. He went on to become a respected physician, always remembering the lessons learned in the shadow of the stone skin mystery. The aqua muta spring was drained and its mineral source sealed. The quarries were deemed safe. Cava de Tirreni, though scarred, slowly returned to its vibrant self. The whispers of the stone sickness faded, replaced by cautionary tales of the sculptor of silence and the doctor who ended his reign. But the echoes lingered. For Alessandro, the sight of a child's hand or sunlight on stone sometimes triggered a familiar dread. He had confronted human depravity, witnessing the horrifying intersection of scientific knowledge and psychological delusion. He learned that the greatest horrors are often terrifyingly human, born from distorted perceptions and unbridled obsession. He never forgot the silent beauty of the petrified children, their faces frozen in eternal innocence, a haunting reminder of lives tragically transformed into macabre art. This memory fueled his lifelong commitment to ethical scientific practice, ensuring profound knowledge would always be used for healing, never for harm. The macabre mystery of the stone-skinned children was solved, its perpetrator brought to justice, but its chilling legacy, a testament to the thin veil between genius and madness, continued to resonate in Alessandro Ricci's mind, a permanent shadow on his extraordinary life. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. This is a fictional story,